another episode of Postpartum in the Raw. We are so super excited to have Keisha Mathis joining us today. Welcome, Keisha.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm doing great.
I am so glad that you decided to join us and share a bit about your postpartum journey. So, in the beginning of every interview, I like to ask folks whether or not they knew anything about postpartum before they first experienced it. Was there any ways that you were prepared for it? And if so, how was that preparation in contrast to what you actually experienced?
No, absolutely not. I knew nothing. I had my first child at 18. And so, even though you're giving birth to a child and technically an adult, your mentality is still kind of that as a child to an
Mm-hmm.
extent. And so, but nobody really gives you the space to kind of transition from that childhood to adulthood, like what that looks like. So I really didn't get um, instruction or ideas or understanding that you would expect potentially for a mother or mother to be to receive to understand what's going on. What am I? I understood the science of like babies and childbirth and everything else, but outside of those specific things, no, I had no postpartum plan. I did not have any postpartum support. The only things I got were like old, I want to call them old wives' tales. Like there's a little bit of something to it that does, help you with your recovery process because you don't want to do too much. You really do want to take the time to rest and hopefully bond with your baby. But little things like, don't be up and down them stairs and you
It's
know,
valid though. It's valid.
right, because of the way that your muscles have to move in order to move up and down the stairs, which, you know, most people wouldn't consider. But like, oh, I'm engaging areas that need rest when I'm going up these stairs. Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, no. And
Nice. So, how many children do you have, and maybe even talk about what that your first postpartum experience was, kind of being that young, and then I'm guessing have you when what age were you when you had your last child?
I was 38 when I had my last child.
Okay, so if
So,
you can kind of just take us through those different postpartum experiences that you had and what that was like for you.
yeah. So I have to say, and it hurts my heart that like a lot of what you do and other women within your field, like it was foreign to me. Like I didn't even know you existed until after I had my last child, and I was like, dang, I would have loved it. So if and when I have another one, I'll be calling you. But I definitely, the difference between postpartum at 18 and postpartum at 38 was I had more grace for myself. um, I was okay with resting. I was okay with taking time to really be with and bond with my son. I actually took some time from work. I was intentional about that. I actually took money from my retirement so I would not have to go back to work, um, so that I could be comfortable and not, stressed out because I was nursing. And so all those little things affect how how your body is moving when you're stressed. You're not able to do all the things that you would want to do. There's so many things that I wish that I knew about just because, you know, diastasis, you know, I, I wish that I understood like the importance of like wrapping. Like it's not just, oh, I want to snap back. Like, I'm okay with having a cute shape, but I'd rather have a solid shape that's well supported. So when I look at I have back pain, I understand that my core muscles are not able to support me because there's a separation there. So they can be as strong as I want them to be, but they're supposed to be a unit and they're divided. And
Separated.
a house divided against itself can't stand. Um, my middle postpartum experiences, I would say, were probably the worst experiences for me. Um,
Mm.
and I hate to feel like the two bookends were better because my partner was not involved in that process. But honestly, I just did not have good partners, and so um, my two middle children, I was with my partner actively, and it was horrible. There was no support. There was an expectation for me essentially to still kind of do work and be present and available, and all these stereotypical things that women do or women are supposed to do. And I'm like, where's where's the recovery? The second one, I had a C-section,
Mm.
and so that made it even harder. I just had major surgery. I shouldn't be driving a car. I shouldn't be at the grocery store. I shouldn't be, all these different little things. Like, I should be with my baby. I shouldn't be going like right back to work. Why do I have a partner if I got to go to work? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. And so, how is that emotionally in terms of um, that impact? Because for so many, that bonding time, if it's not there and you have to get right back to work, not for everyone, but it can affect you um, mentally and emotionally. So what was that portion like?
So for me, it was like a strained relationship,
Mm.
unfortunately, with my daughters. Um, because when you have that time to kind of bond, it's like you create the silent communication between the two of you, the silent understanding and knowing, where as me not having that and being kind of forced out into these other areas, you to be able to like mentally do that work,
Hmm.
you kind of have to like disconnect a little bit. And so, being out of that relationship and having gone through therapy, and, when you add on to that, the understanding that, oh, I have a dissociative disorder that I developed in childhood, and now I'm intentionally disconnecting from my children so that we can, be okay. Um, it just, it's hard. Like, I'm still doing the work to rebuild the relationship because there's, of course, a plethora of other things that go into what our relationship looked like, and just based on the nature of the relationship that I had with their father.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no, it's still something that's kind of like I could still cry right now. Like, my second oldest, I didn't get to nurse. Like, I was only able to nurse for maybe like a month, and then I had to go back to work, and I was pumping, but I didn't have the support. I had the complaints. And so, you know, because the other person was having difficulty feeding, her with the bottle, there ultimately it came to a refusal. Like, I'm just not going to do this. And I'm like, but I'm telling you the different things to try, to make
Hmm.
her comfortable. Like, grab one of my t-shirts. Your babies know your smell. Like,
Hmm.
you smell like you. Maybe wash your hands and take off your weed shirt before you pick the baby up. Like, little things.
Could be helpful. And that's definitely a hack that I share with a lot of dads, is actually like not a totally, hold on one second. Honey, this is postpartum in the raw, real live in effect. The 9-year-old turning on the sink. Hello. Anyway, it is an actual hack that we use for dads, where having a moderately dirty shirt, not dirty with like soil, but just like the pheromones on there, and placing it on their chest so that the baby is kind of quote unquote tricked into thinking that mom is there. And it is extremely, extremely helpful in the process. And so, you know, you're mentioning something, and I want to highlight this because out of a lot of these interviews, you're probably the first person to mention lack of support in the way that you're mentioning it. And if I'm being honest and if I'm being real, I don't think that that's an accident. I do believe that we have different challenges as Black women, Black people in community, in our relationships, and ultimately when it comes down to things like giving birth, breastfeeding, time to bond, and all these other things, we can look at this social media, whatever, and go, oh yeah, I want to try that. And then you kind of land back to earth and you realize that there's nothing about your personal situation or maybe your community or potentially your partner. And again, this is not a generalization, but before this revolution of talking about it more, so many of us were not supported. And it impacts our mental health, our emotional health, and ultimately our relationships with our children. And so thank you for being honest about that, because that is something that's very, I believe it's more widespread amongst Black women. And it's really sad because we don't get to enjoy motherhood and the introduction into motherhood the same as so many other folks do. So you mentioned being diagnosed with a dissociative, is it called a dissociative disorder? Am I saying that correct?
Mm-hmm.
What was the process like understanding that? Like, how did you even come to discover that? Is that something you knew before you got pregnant, or is that something you discovered along your mental health journey
So
after becoming?
okay. That's something I discovered along my mental health journey after I got divorced. Um, so once I got divorced, I was really intentional about going to therapy. I was in an abusive relationship, and it was abusive like across the board. I'm like, dang, you checked all the boxes. You know, the physical, the financial, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. Like, leave no stone unturned. So I knew that I ultimately would love to have another relationship, but I also knew that something somewhere was broken because even though, he was the person that he was, and, being a partner who's abusive, you're moderately predatory, right? Because you kind of seek out a partner who's going to kind of allow and accept those things, and you kind of groom them into that position, which is, part of the reason that abuse is so widespread. And there's really no factors that kind of like socioeconomic or anything that level it off. It just is across the board. And so I knew that I had been a partner in my situation because I chose to be in it. I knew what it was like, and I chose to stay. Ultimately, to the point of eventually marriage. And so I had to really kind of ask myself some really hard questions. And I knew it wasn't something that I could like vet and flesh out on my own. I was like, something is wrong if this is what I thought was okay for me, and this is what I thought that I deserved or the best that I could do. And I just decided, even if I don't have another intimate relationship, um, I don't want this. So let me deal with myself so that I can be the best version of Keisha. And so through that process, because there was some trauma and abuse in my childhood, it's kind of where I came to that understanding. And it's even in talking to my older children after the fact, I didn't realize how many things I had already dissociated myself from, even within my marriage, because they'll come and bring me, oh, remember that time, or we'll be talking about something like, and it, unfortunately it might go down a dark road, like, remember that time my dad did it, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
he did what to
Yeah.
me? Because at this point in my life, I that's just not something that I would accept or acquiesce to. But knowing that that was an issue that I struggled with, and then struggling, to stop living my life from that place of kind of hiding myself and finding my own safe place to be, and learning how to be consistently present, healing from my trauma, being able to be really loving with my youngest child, which is something that, a lot of my kids missed out on. I was not emotionally well. I wasn't in a position to do the simple things like hugs. And so I provided, I did a lot of the basics. I, you know, tried to make sure that, you know, different morals and understandings were passed on. And I'd hug from time to time because, oh, hugs are needed, but no, hugs are needed.
Yeah.
And so hugs, cuddling, all types of little, little things that I just, have had the opportunity to go back and apologize to my children for, but not just apologize, but also encourage them. Hey, you know what? Mom did this wrong. And I know that because it's something that you need and needed, it may potentially have an effect that you don't want later in your life. So I want to encourage you to do therapy. I want to encourage you to get the help that you need now so you're not, in your late 30s or early 40s, like, hashing out all the things of your childhood so that you can really, really, live the rest of your life as your best life. Like you're still young enough to have the opportunity to really enjoy the rest of your life fully. So please go do that. So, pretty much all my kids are in therapy, which
I love that though. I'm serious. Like when my oldest daughter, she got to college, she was like, "Oh, they're offering free therapy because it was like 2020 when she landed on campus." And I was like, "Honey, go, 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 go. You're the oldest. I know I didn't get any like everything right. Like, please." Do we need to chat and chew? When do we need to meet up for coffee and talk about all the ways that I screwed up? Like, I am down to work through it, to heal through it. I love you, and I'm also very self-aware and keenly aware of all the places that I missed. And so I love that you're encouraging your children into developing those healthy habits um, ASAP and as soon as possible so that they can start off better than we did, honey. So it sounds like, because I wanted to ask about if there were any sort of support systems that you did have um, in any of those situations, meaning extended families, the aunties, grandmas, any sort of community support that helped you navigate through any of your postpartum situations, and if so, who were those people, and how did that impact how you navigated through your postpartum season?
So with my youngest son, I was able to fly my mom out to
Okay.
stay with me. She stayed with me for, I want to say, the first 2 months, and just basically did a lot of the heavy lifting. Um, One of my older children was old enough to drive. So, or no, my two older kids were old enough to drive, and so they were able to navigate getting their younger sibling to and from school and getting themselves to school and other things. So I really didn't have to um, do that much, and I just I there's a part of me that's like, oh, I wish I had done this each time.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes you don't know what you need until you get it, and you're like, dang, I wanted that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And so that helped you um, bond and I'm guessing rest because she basically, you're saying, took care of everything outside of um, taking the younger children to school and everything around the house. Did she prepare meals for you?
Oh yeah, I didn't cook, which is always a plus. I think everybody, unless you really just hated your mama's cooking when you were little, when your mama come to town and pull out some skillets,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
because it's like Christmas.
Yes. I love that. And so how long was she able to stay and support you?
So she stayed for the first 2 months.
The first 2 months. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And so for me, it's always like, depending on relationship and how you get along and all of that. But, I don't want people to think that you have to have a postpartum doula per se, or that it has to look a certain kind of way. That you can absolutely leverage your community, your mom, your aunties, your sisters, your besties, whoever, to show up and encourage them to support you during those early days. So I do ask, hindsight being 2020, what would you have done differently? But it sounds like you would have flown your mom out for every.
Yeah, and I would
Is
have
there
found it
anything else?
adapting. Like,
Yeah.
bro, pause. Because from the first time that I had the opportunity to meet you and discuss what you do and learn more about the services that you provide throughout pregnancy and after, yeah, no, like I can think of multiple um, experiences within even just being in the hospital where I really just needed someone else to help me advocate for what I wanted and what I didn't want, and for what was acceptable as far as, even treatment or talking to me. Because, when you're in labor, they want to, a lot of times they'll treat you like you're kind of being over the top or extra or whatever the case is. And they'll just kind of push your thoughts and feelings to the side, like, oh, whatever, you're having a baby, and just kind of disregard you and dismiss you. And so having someone in position to advocate for you, um, especially during labor and delivery, and even postpartum, if you are at risk for complications, is so huge, because those are like a lot of the riskiest times for us as Black women, and the fact that it's such a dismissive time doesn't really help. And depending on where you're birthing and who's involved in the process, like I'm in Colorado. It's not a large percentage of African Americans. The odds of me having a Black OBGYN doctor that was actually assigned at the hospital when I went to deliver the last couple of times were slim. I had an insurance company that you don't just get a doctor and that doctor is, on call for you, which the first time I delivered, I had the benefit of that. It was a wonderful doctor. His name was Kevin Hines. And considering the treatment he set a standard for me for treatment. And so when I don't see that, I'm like, dang, he treated me better as a child than you're treating me as a, full adult woman. And so, yeah, somebody to advocate for me, somebody that really understands the process of what I'm going through, what it looks like, what that discrimination looks like in the labor and delivery room, within the system. I just, you can advocate for yourself, but it's just like, my children advocating for themselves. There's a wall that they're going to hit. And so you need somebody that's going to be like, okay, no, we're going to break this little glass ceiling and we're going to get these issues addressed, and, be able to go from there. Oh, something is in my eye. Jesus.
It's all good. Yeah, no, I love that. Advocacy is huge, right? And I'm a huge proponent for practicing that, actually, like as early as possible, even before you get pregnant, but definitely earlier on in pregnancy, because you are flexing a muscle, you're working that muscle that ultimately is something you're going to use in every aspect of your life. So you're going to use it if you're choosing to birth in the hospital, you use it there. But even postpartum, when it comes to being okay with expressing your actual needs, so many of us are not used to being heard, or people even actually caring to hear what it is that we have to say. And so, when you're practicing that self advocacy, you're flexing, flexing, flexing. You'll see it show up in the workplace when you go back to work. If you go back to work, you'll see it show up in your leadership, in your parenting. You'll create boundaries in better ways. And so, yeah, advocacy is huge, but it's never too late. So,
I had to learn to be comfortable with being seen as the angry Black woman.
Yes.
because a lot of times that's the stereotype that gets pulled out when you are advocating for yourself and not accepting the responses that are given. When I had my third child, um, I had her at a hospital in Lafayette, which was the worst experience I've ever had in my life.
Lafayette, Colorado?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
Um, and the nurse wouldn't even hand me my baby. I ended up having an epidural because it was a VBAC. And so there
Mhm.
was a concern during part of the laboring process that I may need to actually have a cesarean. So I
Okay.
ended up having an epidural, and the nurse who was in my delivery, it's not my first rodeo. I know I don't need more of the medication. Please stop pushing the button.
Mhm.
Because when you have an epidural, you still feel the pressure. You
Mhm.
know, like, hey, you know what? I feel like I need to push. Can you please check? And so she was like, no, you don't need to push. It's too soon. And so she just kept, flexing that button for me. I'm like, bro, I'm not in pain. So ultimately, I ended up, your legs are numb. So it's going to take longer
Yeah.
to be able to get up and move around. And so I was not able to get up and get my baby for myself to nurse her. And the nurse flat out refused to hand me my child. And I was there by myself because I had, other children, older children at that point in time. So, their father had taken them home so they could go to school and everything else the next day. Um,
Wow.
and so it was like if I could have stood up, I probably we might not be having this interview. I'll be fresh out of my orange jumpsuit.
That's true. That's crazy that she was even allowed to do that. But you know what? It happens. in in so many cases it happens. And no one is able to really like what could you do in that moment? You can't get up out of the bed.
Right.
Only
It's
thing you
just
could do
me
is
and this nurse
yell.
call button.
Yeah, and
And
scream
you
and it's insane. Oh man. So that's funny. I'm sorry. I just keep thinking about you coming out in an orange jumpsuit talking about that's right. Next time you're gonna hand me my baby when I ask you to. Oh my goodness. So most of the women here that I have on the show, the folks that I have on the show, um, they're entrepreneurs. They either have resources for parents or they're doing something in community or they're running some amazing organization. Could you share with our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how they can get in contact with you?
okay. So outside of being a unlicensed, unpaid comedian, I'm also an herbalist. And so I'm the founder of Herbal Honey.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do a lot of custom formulations. Most of the things that I create are wellness based. I just had the opportunity of actually creating some postpartum vaginal steams for Mama Bird maternity and wellness spa. So I'm really excited about those and to see how those are received and how they work for the ladies. Um, but I'm all about the opportunity and the ability to be a part of your own healing journey. And so that's part of what drew me into herbalism. That and my mom's story. That's on my website if you want to read it. We won't get into it today, but it's herbalhoney.net. And so everything that I do is based around education and then personal wellness. I think in order for you to get to a point of wellness and whatever that looks like for you, not the statistical standard of what wellness should be, because even though we're the basis of a lot of the statistics from a lot of free research from
True.
unlicensed professionals, but that's a whole nother interview, right? Um, it's important advocacy is important. It's one of the things that I do discuss, when it comes to educating yourself. What does it look like to take care of me and be in position and be willing to not be shut down? But at the point that you're in the hospital with the terrible nurse in labor and delivery, you don't really have the option to um, request someone else or get a second opinion. So it's all about the work leading up to that moment and being present for yourself. But um, wellness is huge for me. I love what I do. I just created some new blends that aren't available yet. I just made some new stuff for PCOS that I'm looking at testing out. I just
Please
made
share
some
that
stuff
with us
for
as soon as it drops.
menopause. And if you're interested in potentially being a tester, if it's not up on my website, please feel free to email me, Keisha@herbalhoney.net, and I can connect with you and we can see how effective it is, and maybe what things I need to adjust. Of course, everything that I make isn't going to be 100% effective for everybody because we're all so different, even though we don't always acknowledge it. So it may work a little bit for you, but you might need a little bit more of this, or it may work not as well. So the point, hopefully, is for it to be generally effective for most people. And then, of course, I do custom formulations on the side, so I can always put something together for someone individually or even make adjustments to the formula for you because there's so many different things that affect PCOS. It could be adrenal fatigue, it could be um, insulin resistance. Like you never know what your main factors are with that. And so, or it could just be you have a bad doctor and you shouldn't have been on birth control. Been there. So, you know,
Yeah.
there's so many things, but I love what I do, and I do it mostly for the ladies, but also for the fellas.
I love that. And so, to be clear, you do offer one-on-one consultations in case folks want to meet with you about custom blends. And Keisha is Keisha at herbalhoney.net.
Uh-huh.
Okay, awesome. I just want, we could spell Keisha a lot of different ways. So I want to make sure they
Yes.
know
Yes.
exactly how to contact you. So yes, thank you so much, Keisha, for sharing your story and for being vulnerable and hilarious today. It was a beautiful mix. And for those of you that are listening, just be encouraged. We all have very, very different postpartum journeys. We have different backgrounds, we have different cultures, but by talking and sharing and being vulnerable with one another, we're hoping that we can all navigate postpartum a little bit better. So we will talk to you guys later.